Welcome, and in this lesson, we're going to talk about Amazon Web Services that are required for the CSA in the App Services category. So first, let's introduce ourselves to Amazon Simple Workflow Service, also known as SWF. SWF is a long-term processing workflow solution. For example, let's say that we have a job which is to piece together multiple images. And we need that job to execute over a specific time frame. It could go from starting the job to piece together those components to even a human component that is required to approve the piece together image. All of this allows us to create what's called a workflow. A first job in a workflow, a first step in a workflow could be to piece together those components. A second step could be to upload it to some specific server or location. A third step could be to notify an employee that they need to approve the process or do something else in their provisioning process. The workflow service allows us to take a task and step through it. We can do that task for even up to a year. So it glues together a piece of our infrastructure. So what it does, it allows us to track workflow executions. The AWS control panel gives us the ability to monitor task workflow. There's consistent execution. We're never going to have duplicates, and we're guaranteed to go through the workflow process. If the workflow process has a high amount of demand, and one of the jobs has multiple tasks assigned to it that required piecing together of lots of photos, we can actually set up EC2 processing to handle those workflows. We can fire up instances to handle each job or task as the workflow executes. And the service can be used with on-premise servers. We can use the API and our on-premise servers. We don't necessarily have to be using EC2. So the simple workflow service is primarily for developing with applications and integrating it using the SDK. And what it does is it guarantees execution workflow. It also guarantees that there is not duplicate jobs. Now, we will look at SWF a little bit more. It's an interesting process. If you take a look at NASA is using it with their Mars rover to actually piece together images and components. It takes a lot of processing power, and it takes a lot of time to take 1,000 images and piece it together in one panorama. And that's what they're using Simple Workflow Service for. They're creating this task and job and allowing this execution for it. Amazon Simple Queue Service is probably a little bit more commonly used inside of AWS for more applications, and it's used to decouple our infrastructure systems. So what happens with SQS, and right now the message size is 256 KB, but what it does, it allows us to create a message inside of a queue. So for example, let's use it in terms of image processing. Let's say we own a company that provides a image tint to every single image that's uploaded. So your web applications would take the image that's uploaded from the customer, would upload it to Amazon S3. The web applications would then send a little message that's 256 KB in size or smaller. It says that this user owns the message. Anything can live in a message. It's just a text document, essentially. It could be JSON. And it says the image is associated with this image S3 object, and it belongs to this user. And then it sends a message to the queue. And then so what we have now is we have an EC2 instance. It's called a worker instance. That's consistently polling the message looking for jobs. If there's a message in there, that worker instance will grab that message and start processing the job. So what have we done here? We've decoupled our application component. So if demand is overriding our worker instances, or if our worker instances fail, we can still accept uploads and queue those inside of a simple queue service queue for processing later on. So this is called application or infrastructure decoupling. Components of our infrastructure are independent of each other, and they can scale out independently as well. If we get a ton of messages and we need to scale out EC2 instances or worker instances, they're called, to handle that processing, we can set up auto scaling, polls those queues, those simple queue service queues, and scales out based off the number of messages. If we have 5,000 messages, maybe one EC2 instances isn't going to be enough to process everything in a timely fashion. So we can automatically auto scale that component of our infrastructure. We could have auto scaling for our web servers, and we could have auto scaling and fault tolerance for that part of our component. So it's a multi-tier application architecture. And again, this is an overview. We're going to look more at this example as we move on. So it guarantees delivery of at least one message, but it does not guarantee that there will be no duplicates of that message just because of how the simple queue service is architected. The simple queue service is highly available by design, so a message is synchronized across all availability zones. If one availability zone goes down for some reason, our message will still be available. Simple Notification Service coordinates and manages the delivery or sending of messages to specific endpoints. The service can be used to publish iOS and Android app notifications, gluing together automation based off of those sent notifications. So for example, this actually integrates in with our reduced redundancy storage notification. If you think back in our S3 overview, I said that when we use reduced redundancy storage type, we can set up an event. This event would notify us, because we're using reduced redundancy storage, one of our objects was lost or became corrupt. So it would work together with Simple Notification Service. We would tell S3 to send an event notification to one of our endpoints. It can either create an SQS queue, an email in JSON format, a text message, hit an HTTPS or HTTP website, or send it to an application. By doing this, we can then take the information from that event notification and automate it. For example, we use this exact example inside of our developer course to demonstrate how to create automation. What we do is we simulate the loss of an S3 object that sends an SQS message that contains information about what object was lost. We have a Python script that receives that SQS queue and processes the recreation of that image. It's very, very cool. Understanding how we can use Simple Notification Service is what we need to know in this course. We don't need to know how to build that automation like we do inside of the developer course. Now, we can use Simple Notification Service to create email or text message notifications that integrate with CloudWatch. For example, if our auto-scaling application fires up a new instance, we can subscribe to an endpoint that notifies us of that firing up. We can have CloudWatch alarms that sends an SQS, that sends a text message or an email to our administrators that says, hey, our CPU utilization on our MySQL server is higher than expected. We need to have some proactive scaling for this. So that's what Simple Notification Service does, and it integrates in with quite a few AWS services. So that concludes it for this lesson. Go ahead and complete this lesson and move on.